It is the year 1000 AD, and European cities look nothing like what you imagine. Now remove everything modern. The roads narrow, the noise changes. You hear animals, voices, tools striking wood and metal. The air smells of smoke, waste, and food. Buildings shrink. Many are made of timber. Stone structures stand, but often broken, reused, or surrounded by empty space.
Around the year 1000, Europe is not dominated by large, dense cities. Instead, it is a world of small urban centers, agricultural economies, regional political powers, and limited long-distance trade compared to the Roman era. The Roman Empire, which once sustained massive cities across Europe, had collapsed in the West centuries earlier. In its place, new systems had emerged: feudal relationships, localized economies, and religious institutions as centers of authority. Only a few cities, most notably Constantinople, retained something close to ancient urban scale. Most others had shrunk dramatically.
One of the biggest misconceptions about medieval cities is their size. Around 1000 AD, Paris may have had around 5,000 to 10,000 inhabitants. London roughly similar, perhaps 10,000 to 20,000. Rome possibly under 30,000. Cologne and Milan within comparable ranges. Compare that to modern populations in the millions. Many cities that are now major capitals were, at the time, no larger than a modern town or even a large neighborhood. This smaller scale changes everything about how cities function. In many cities, Roman structures still dominated the landscape, but not in the way you might expect. You would see broken aqueducts, partially collapsed amphitheaters, abandoned bath complexes, crumbling forums. These were not preserved monuments. They were quarries for building materials, shelters for the poor, foundations for new structures. In Rome, entire populations lived among ancient ruins. In Trier or Cologne, Roman walls still stood, but the cities inside had contracted. The physical presence of Rome remained, but its systems were gone. Modern cities often follow planned grids or organized expansion. Cities around 1000 AD were far less structured. Streets were narrow, winding, often unpaved. They developed organically based on old Roman roads, property boundaries, and natural terrain. In some places, Roman street grids were still visible. In others, they had been lost entirely. Movement through the city was slower, more crowded, and often difficult, especially in bad weather. One of the most important visual differences is construction material. In most European cities around 1000 AD, the majority of buildings were made of wood. Roofs were thatched or shingled. Walls were made from timber frames with wattle and daub infill. Stone buildings existed, but they were usually churches, defensive walls, or residences of elites. This made cities more vulnerable to fire, less durable over time, and constantly changing as structures were rebuilt. This is one reason so little survives visually from this period compared to later centuries.
Cities were not quiet places. Even with smaller populations, daily life was intense and concentrated. You would encounter craftsmen working in open-fronted shops, animals moving through streets, vendors selling food and goods, children, laborers, and travelers sharing the same space. Most people lived and worked in the same building. There was little separation between residential areas, commercial activity, and industrial production. Compared to modern zoning, everything was mixed together.
Urban populations depended heavily on surrounding countryside. Food had to be grown nearby, transported by river or road, stored carefully. Common foods included bread, porridge, vegetables, fish, and occasional meat. In cities like Paris or London, markets were essential, but supply was fragile.
Poor harvests, war, or disrupted trade could quickly lead to shortages. Unlike modern cities, there were no global supply chains. Everything was regional.
Access to clean water varied widely. Some cities retained Roman infrastructure, aqueducts, wells, cisterns. Others relied on rivers and local sources. Sanitation was limited. Waste was often thrown into streets, collected in pits, emptied into nearby rivers. This created strong smells and health risks. One feature that clearly defined cities around 1000 AD was the central role of religion. Churches were among the largest and most important buildings. They served as places of worship, community centers, landowners, sources of authority. In cities like Rome, Paris, or Cologne, religious institutions shaped urban life. Most cities were defined by their defenses. Walls were critical for protection from raids, control of trade, and political authority. Gates regulated movement in and out of the city. At night, gates could be closed. In cities like London or Cologne, Roman walls were reused. In others, new fortifications were built. These defenses gave cities a clear boundary, something often missing in modern urban sprawl.
Although reduced compared to Roman times, trade still existed. Rivers were especially important. Cities like Paris, Seine, London, Thames, Cologne, Rhine functioned as regional trade hubs. Goods moved by boat more easily than by land. Long-distance trade connected Europe to Scandinavia, the Byzantine world, the Islamic world. But these networks were thinner and less reliable than in antiquity. Modern European cities are vast, densely populated, highly organized, and technologically advanced. Cities in 1000 AD were small, irregular, locally focused, and dependent on manual labor. After 1000 AD, European cities began to grow again. Key developments included agricultural improvements, increasing food supply, expansion of trade networks, rise of merchant classes, construction of stone buildings, formation of universities and guild systems. By the 12th and 13th centuries, cities like Paris and London were already expanding beyond their earlier limits. The foundations of modern European urban were being laid.
When we imagine cities 1,000 years ago, we often picture grand stone buildings and organized streets. The reality is different. Most cities were smaller, rougher, more fragile, more dependent on local conditions, yet they were alive. They adapted after the collapse of an empire. They preserved knowledge, trade, and community. And from these modest, imperfect urban centers grew the cities we know today. So when you walk through a modern European capital, you are not just seeing a finished product. You are seeing the result of centuries of rebuilding, layer by layer, on foundations that, around the year 1000, looked far simpler than you might expect.